What's up, my know-it-alls? That's right, it's time for Moon Knight, Episode 5, The Asylum. So this week's episode is actually a lot of fun in that they really went deep into the psyche of Mark Spector. So I'm excited. Let's just get into it. In Episode 5, Asylum, Mark has reawakened as a patient at Putnam Psychiatric Ward. Mark and Stephen Grant, no longer sharing the same body, have to travel the Underworld, better known as the Duat, with the deity Tauret's guidance. During their journey, their hearts are going to be weighed against the feather of Mat on the scales of justice. If, by the end of their journey, their hearts are balanced, they'll be welcomed to the Field of Reeds for all eternity. Unfortunately for Mark and Stephen, to balance their hearts, they're going to have to revisit hidden and painful memories from their past. Right? I know. It's exactly what I'm thinking, you guys. This is such a big idea. This is such a big episode. And the way that this episode deals or chooses to deal with mental health, as well as something as complicated as the idea of dissociative identity disorder, I feel like is to the show's credit. Also, Oscar Isaac is again doing amazing and phenomenal work. The acting in this going not only playing off himself, but also in certain scenes where they show the memories and things, because that's what we do. This entire episode is basically a This Is Your Life episode. So Mark Spector cycles through a series of fragmented memories, including a flooding cave. This cave is very important, and what you see is that you hear the distant cries of a female or woman calling for help. Another woman is screaming vitriol, and you see his first encounter with the goddess Tauret before waking up in Dr. Harrow's office at Putnam Medical Facility. So what this episode does is this episode folds together the concept that maybe all of this is in Mark's head. But what it does is it does it through the storyline of Mark and Stephen having to find their way and find balance before their souls get taken off into the afterlife, which is essentially like the Underworld. It isn't so much heaven or hell as much as it is the Underworld. You do get a really cool name drop though of the Wakandan, again keeping in line with the whole attachment to Wakanda that I've been talking about this entire season. But she mentions the plane of the ancestral plane, and the ancestral plane is where the Black Panthers go in order to meet each other. If you watch Black Panther, that's where the scene where he goes to see Chadwick Boseman goes to see his father, and later on you get to see the same thing with the other guy. Anyway, and so it's really interesting. And so so Harrow. Back to the episode, sorry. Harrow attempts to calm down kind of a really heavily bruised up Mark. Oh yeah, got all kinds of, he's all sort of messed up. Telling him that he didn't shoot him. Harrow didn't shoot him. So he's going through this whole explanation. He's basically letting him know, listen, I didn't shoot you. It's okay. I'm here to help you. And he tries to really walk Mark through this whole thing. And Mark's he tells him that his mind is violently vacillating between sense and nonsense as the brain tries to kind of cope with the very difficult reality that he's facing. And he does face it in this episode. He reminds Mark that he's a patient there at Putnam. That's when we learn the name of the facility. And that he's dealing with these fantastical delusions of being a superhero. And while refusing to kind of acknowledge all the horrors of the past things he's done, as well as kind of, he asks him, kind of retracing Mark's account. Harrow's like, he reminds him that just moments earlier, he had relayed that he was in a hospital just like this, except it was in Egypt, where he was in the company of a talking rhinoceros. So then Mark's like, hippopotamus. and so Mark basically concedes that the pendulum, the notion of the idea they swing from sense and nonsense and whatnot. Encouraged, Harrow states that a struggling mind is often built on very traumatic events can cause the mind to create these sort of shelter. And he explains to him the concept that his mind is essentially creating, sort of taking things from reality in order to build this mind palace of fiction that is protecting him. And so he tells him he needs to go in deeper, and next thing you know, Mark wakes back up in that same sort of place. It's the Egyptian mental hospital, Tauret. He's standing there with, it's Mark and Steven standing together again, and they're Tauret. And you get to see Tauret. Tauret's, by the way, the most adorable person in the world. And so she's really, I do like her. I thought they did a good job with her. And she sort of tells him, no, you're absolutely dead. And so Tauret informs them that they are, and remarking there's been some time since any soul had arrived there. Tauret also tells them that they're in the realm of the Duat. So Steven interjects, kind of delighted and in awe. Steven knows all about this, and he sort of just spews out. He's like, oh yeah, you do this thing, and he's this and that. And he's basically explaining to Mark what's going on, and he's sort of fangirling over Tauret. No problem. So Tauret reveals this absolutely is the afterlife, and not just any afterlife, but because there's many intersectional planes. So then the true nature of the Duat is impossible for the human mind to comprehend, which is why the place looks like a psych ward. I like that concept. I think that concept, especially when you're dealing with ideas that are very cerebral, I think that concept lends itself better to this type of filmmaking and this type of storytelling. So again, I'm very much enjoying it. So then Tauret kind of turns around and pushes the doors open, and you see that they are actually, in fact, on Tauret's massive boat in the afterlife. And as it goes, it navigates the Underworld desert, as if the Underworld desert was a sea. So it's a boat on sand doing its thing. She then reaches into their chests and pulls out their hearts, which are in the form of these little sort of stone crystal things. And she places them on the scales of justice, where they're weighed against the feather of truth. It's ancient mythology with Egypt, that this is Egyptian mythology rather, that's how the afterlife works. So I'm not sure how many of you familiar. I wasn't super familiar with this. Did a little bit of research for the show today, and was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So but she has the same problem Harrow had a few episodes ago, which is they won't stop doing this thing here. But they're kind of vacillating back and forth. She explains to them that they're going to have to go back inside the psych ward and figure it out. And so, in fact, it's funny. Earlier, she was asking them, she's like, I'm not really sure why it looks like a psychiatric hospital. And Mark's like, that's because we're broken. That's because we're crazy. So anyway, so then she explains to them not only that if they don't go back and solve it, they're going to get sucked into the sands of the underworld, like so many other souls have been lost. And that if they can make them balance, they get led into the field of reeds, heaven, Elysium, if you will. So speaking privately to Steven, Mark refuses to go to the Duat or the field of reeds. He proposes that he's like, but if we could kill the hippo or steal the boat or throw her over the side, whatever, we'll figure something out. But the conversation is very interrupted right then by Tauret, who notices that the scales are swaying again, even more from side to side. She says that neither heart is full because each one feels incomplete. She regretfully states that without balancing the scales, the Duat are eventually going to claim their souls, rooting for them. She tells them to go back inside the boat, figure it all out. So then we enter the doorway to all of their past memories. So when they go back inside the boat, Mark still thinks his plan is going to be to kind of commandeer Tauret's boat because reasons and Moon Knight. And that they're better kind of overcoming their blockages. So ignoring Mark, Steven kind of approaches one of the door, and the doors now have had kind of smoky white windows you couldn't really see in. Now each of the windows clears almost like it's frosted over, and you get to kind of see into some memories. So Steven approaches one of the doors, which shows him the moment he allowed Mark as Moon Knight to take over their body, sort of the handle, the jackal, that whole thing. Harrow, the one that Harrow released in the museum back in episode 1. So then they move to another door. Steven recalls the recent evening where Mr. Knight rather helped Khonshu, the one where they're cycling through all the what they call the 1,000 Egyptian nights, because it's so poetic to call it that. That was back from episode 3. But then peering through one of the doorways, Steven comes across one of Mark's memories. However, Mark refuses to revisit every single one of his memories he's ever had. Suddenly, Mark and Steven sort of hear a distant cry for help from a child. It's the same one we heard in the beginning. Steven takes off running down the hall. Mark's following him. They enter a kind of a cafeteria filled with dead bodies. Steven sees the scales, and he notices that they're swaying violently back and forth. Mark slowly walks around the room. These are all people he's killed in the name of Khonshu. And these are all people that did bad things. They were punished. He killed them. And moving on with life. Mark explains that each of the bodies there belong to criminals, murderers, predators, the worst of the worst, and that Khonshu wanted all of them individuals punished. But that doesn't mean that doesn't weigh on him. And taking a person's life, Steven's like, oh, I'm surprised you remember all these people. And he's like, you try killing somebody. So then Steven notices the scales are slowing, which means acknowledging the hidden parts of their past is working. So it's a good thing. Hugely good thing. Then in the corner of the room, Steven spots a little boy. He's suddenly really upset because he's like, why is there a child in a room full of people you've killed? And the implication, I assume, being, as a mercenary, have you killed children? Or something else to that effect. So then Steven kind of runs after the kid, kind of scared, runs through the hallways. Steven locks the door, preventing Mark from following them. The hallway he goes into opens up to the backyard. It's a brand new memory. He sees his mom, Wendy. She's barbecuing. Very outside. Very family event. Very family-oriented moment. And you get to see the kids. I say kids because apparently Mark had a brother. And he sort of forgot this. And so they go out for a while. Wendy's kind of like, hey, watch your brother, this and that, take care of him. And so they go out, and this takes us to the cave. Remember, Steven's the only person who is there right now, and he's witnessing this whole thing. And they went to explore a cave before dinner, whatever. What you find out is that Steven... okay. This is all building up to something. Mark went down to the cave where they shouldn't have gone. Him and his brother were playing explorers, Professor Stephen Grant, and blah, 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 and the whole thing. The same thing we watched that was a VHS tape or whatever. This is actually a movie he liked and respected. Hence, why they did things like that. They went exploring. It was raining. The cave goes downward. Water fills the cave. Immediately, Steven's not stupid. He's like, oh no. And he knows. So he's trying to get down there. The water's getting up higher, like literally from his ankles. It gets to his knees. And then eventually he's swimming, trying to get to where the boys are because this was a tragic moment. Mark, meanwhile, is pacing the hallways. He's going through the hallways. He's looking for other entrances, other ways, other things, whatever. And eventually he finds another entrance to the same memory that Steven stumbled upon. He startled when he sees his mother staring coldly at him through one of the doorways. Overwhelmed by Steven's voice and the cries of his younger brother, Randall, Mark closes his eyes, kind of reminding himself that this is just a memory. A different doorway opens up for him, allowing him to re-enter his childhood home as his family holds a Shiva for his brother Randall. They're Jewish. As kind of he approaches where his parents are, he sees Steven across the room, soaking wet and despondent. Doesn't want to talk. Inconsolable. Completely inconsolable. So Mark and Steven kind of witness the whole thing. Wendy tells Elias all she wants is her Roro back. Because Randall's dead. However, she snaps when she spies young Mark down the stairs. Come down the stairs. She starts shouting at him, and she's just your veins in her neck is popping out. She's angry. She's super angry. It's a very tragic moment. So I feel like this entire episode fits or lives into the same universe of my headcanon as Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Why? In any other context, this episode would be a full-on mental health family drama. I think people are going to sleep on this show and sleep on this episode because it's a superhero thing. And I feel like when you have to deal with those kinds of stakes, because this isn't man versus an enemy, this is man versus himself. And it's interesting enough that I feel like they're doing some serious work here, man. The acting of the actress who plays his mom, the guy who plays his father, everybody, they're doing amazing stuff. And I sit here and I'm like, God bless, man. In any other context, they'd be getting Emmys, Oscars, awards of some sort. But because it's superheroes, you sleep on it. Anyway. So, Mark kind of really begs Steven to leave. And ultimately, he's horrified. Steven is horrified to see that his mother blames him for Randall's death, and we kind of cut to the next floor of their house, and you kind of see another memory. This time it's Elias begging his wife to come out and celebrate their son's birthday. She was so bad. She spiraled into depression, and became abusive, and so you get to see him go up another level. This time you see another birthday, and Elias is enthusiastically makes Mark's favorite cake for his 12th birthday. However, the drunk mom kind of like staggers over, and she's like, I always knew you, this and that. And she's sort of talking to him all abusive, and he runs out. Steven's really upset, and that Mark kind of was like, why do you remember her like this? This is nothing like who she was. And he demands to go back inside, and ultimately they're interrupted as another memory kind of pours out into their neighborhood street. This time a young Mark storms off with a duffel bag, and it's reminiscent of scenes we've seen before, which is, hey, I'm tired of taking this abuse, I'm leaving. And you get to see him. I'd place him at either college age, so maybe 18 to 20. Yeah, I think somewhere in there. And he's like, his father's like, come on, please, she's going to get help, this and that. He's like, no, I refuse. Absolutely not. I'm done. And he leaves. And so he promises he's going to fix it and whatnot. And Mark snaps. And he's supposed to fix this and doesn't understand why his father hasn't. So Mark tackles Steven at this point, and they sort of are back into the house again. And the scuffle lands them sort of in another memory. It's an Egyptian desert. And we finally get to see the whole story. Mark kind of reveals that he went AWOL in a fugue state. That's an interesting distinction. If you read anything about psychology, fugue states are known to be the gateway drug, if you will, to dissociative personality disorder. It's a very rare diagnosis, even though fiction and movies and stuff will put it on there. So I'm glad that they're sort of trying to stick to some of the rules and not just what popular entertainment wants to make of it. And that's a good thing. It really is. No, it really is. And again, I like the fact that they mentioned that. Anyway, so a fugue state is sort of, so we get to know that this is sort of where a lot of this begins for him. Or is it? And he explains that he was discharged and he ended up doing some mercenary work. There's not a whole lot of work for soldiers who kind of go AWOL and whatnot. And he worked for a guy named Bushman, who was his superior officer, command officer. Bushman, for those of you playing at home from the comic books, is the guy who, it's definitely a Moon Knight enemy. And he's the guy who betrays him. And he's the guy who shot him all up. And so Steven sort of sees everything, sees the bodies laying around. He sees Layla's father dead, and he looks and he's like, well, what happened to you? And you see this trail of blood through the sand, and you get to the steps of the pyramid, or not pyramid, but the temple rather, of Khonshu. And he's there at Khonshu's at the base, and all of a sudden you hear Khonshu's voice, and he's like, what a waste. And it's such, you're like, oh, I haven't heard his voice in a while. I definitely love F. Murray Abraham for all day long. Friend of the show. And I love saying that. It's totally not true, but I love saying it. He kind of remorsefully recollects that he tried to get all the hostages away, but they didn't make it. And so that's when Khonshu begins to sort of make him a deal. Funny enough, the only cogent person in this moment is Steven. Because Mark is very much of the mindset, hey man, I had no choice. This is what was going to happen. I had to, he helped bring us back to life. We had no choices. And Steven's like, he took advantage of you. And it's great to see that even a personality, because you find out that the other personality, the Steven personality, well, you find it out a little bit later. Anyway, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Mark and Steven kind of are pulled from that particular memory once more, this time by a disturbance caused by some baboons or creatures that in ancient Egypt viewed as the dead who oversaw the Duat. Returning onto the deck of the boat, Tauret kind of tells Mark and Steven that fear is spreading in the underworld because unbalanced souls are in the land of the living, are being judged and condemned to the sands before their time. Steven explains this is an evil act that Harrow's doing. So he begs Tauret, and Steven is the one who begs. And he tells him, look, send us back. If we can return, we can fix this. And ultimately, Tauret's like, are you sure that you want to go back to Khonshu? It seems like you're kind of screwed up. So then Steven demands to go back into the house. This time they throw caution to the wind and not noting Osiris will not be pleased. Tauret decides, screw it, I'm going to help you. And she turns the boat. And the whole boat begins to veer around. And she's like, you guys got to get back inside. Hurry up, get yourselves balanced. Mark and Steven walk into the hall as soon as they're in the thing, and he's literally telling him, he's like, dude, it's okay. Listen, we don't have to do this. Don't worry about it. I don't want to go back to that memory. Let's just deal with this all together. Steven's pretty like, what are you talking about? We could lose everything. We have to go back. And so, or Harrow succeeds, Layla dies, everyone dies. And so, while Steven's talking really rationally, Mark's like, no, I can't go back. And he starts slapping his face and slapping his head. And next thing you know, the slaps transition to Harrow putting his hand on his shoulder, and they're suddenly there again. And so earlier I started talking about what they're doing in terms of the psychology, of the psychological hospital stuff. And for me, I feel like they're very much, what they've done is, everything we see between Steven and Mark together is them dealing directly. When we come back out of that, it's Mark dealing with his own instability, which happens to be in the form of Harrow, who, for good or bad, better or worse, is the vehicle by which Mark's mind is channeling, solving and trying to figure out fixing himself. It's helping him learn to fix himself. According to what we get from Harrow, there's the inference that Mark is ultimately working through some things, and he sort of praises him for it, and he's like, hey, you've done the work, you're doing great, with all this progress, kind of Harrow poses a question to him, does Mark think he created Steven in order to hide from all the awful things that he's done in his life? Or does he think Steven created Mark to punish the world for what his mother did to him? Essentially asking him, who's the real you? See, you got to remember, in genuine scenarios, aside from if you don't have any information about yourself, all this doctor has to go on is you. That's it. So unless you have a family member or something else who brought you to this thing and checked you in or whatever else, something who can help identify, oh, hey, by the way, this is Larry. And the guy's like, no, I'm Scott. All right, well, then we clearly know Larry's the beginning and Scott is the new. And you just deal. Or vice versa, depending on who's the one bringing you in. Anyway, Harrow advises Mark that it's time to open up to Steven. Which brings us to his childhood bedroom again. And this time, Mark pushes all of his kind of Tomb Buster toys off his desk. Steven kind of tells Mark that he remembers the bedroom, but he doesn't kind of remember this memory. And you see the tail end of what began in an earlier scene, and you get to see the kid sitting there crying, and as he's crying, there's a mirror right next to him. And you hear his mother banging at the door. Open this door, Mark! Open this door! And next thing you know, you see the kid do the thing, and his eyes roll back into the back of his head, and next thing you know, he gets up and he's like, oh, this place is a mess. My mother's never going to like this. And and then you see Steven. Steven kind of pokes his head around Mark, and he's looking closely, and he starts mouthing the same lines the kid is, because this is some of his first memories. Steven realizes, that's the aha moment. That's it. Steven realizes Mark invented him. Mark made him up. The moment's interrupted. Wendy bursts in the room. She grabs the belt, and Mark starts pushing Steven out. Steven's like, what's going on? What's happening? What's happening? And you hear she's beating him, clearly. Frustrated, Mark kind of explains Steven got to live a happy and simple, normal life thanks to him. Who cares if it's a lie, right? Why would anyone want to live with the truth that his life was living hell? Steven was the buffer. Steven was the thing that could handle all the issues. Steven, he tries to tell him, you don't, I wanted you to remember her that way. And then he spits out, I didn't want you to remember the fact that she's dead. Steven can't handle that. Steven's very much like, dude, you're just trying to hurt me. That's it. You're trying to hurt me. It's revisionist history. It's this and that. And next thing you know, Steven wakes up in Harrow's office. Harrow's like, hey, it's okay. I apologize. It's good. And he's like, yeah, he's telling me lies. And he's like, what'd he tell you? He's like, my mother's dead. And he's like, well, she is dead. And he's like, no, she's not. Are you getting a laugh at this at my expense? And then he's like, okay. You're right. He calmly picks up the phone. You want to speak to her? Let's give her up. Let's ring her up right now. We have their number. And Steven intensely refuses, and he's not even asking. So then Steven finally kind of hesitates and approaches the phone with tears in his eyes as Harrow hands him toward the phone. And then he holds a receiver, and Steven acknowledges his mom's dead. Yeah. Revisiting that first memory, they appeared in the doorway, Elias kind of holding Shiva for the light. So when they appeared in the doorway, the memory, if what I'm talking about is, they revisit that moment. It's the moment with outside the car and dude standing there, and you find out that's the moment that Elias has invited Mark home, and Mark can't deal with it. And you see Mark, he's walking down the street, and he's angry, and he's upset, and he falls on his knees, and then, boom, he kind of like does the thing, and Steven shows up, and Mark tells him, this is the moment. This is the moment. This happened 2 months prior to everything we've seen so far. And he says, this is the moment when our lives began to bleed in together. And it was because he couldn't process how to handle this. He couldn't make him process how to handle it. He just moved on with it. That's when all of a sudden, while they're in the middle of the street, everything sort of shakes. They have to rush back onto the deck. And you see that they have approached and arrived at Osiris's gate, except that they have not managed to balance their thing. And as a result, Tauret's like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything else. And so then these zombie things start trying to come out of the sand. Mark is seemingly being dragged back over the boat. And Steven's like, Mark, you got this. You can do this. And he's like, wait a minute. But if you got this, we're the same body. I got this. He rushes up. One of the zombies had a bat. He grabs the bat. And funny enough, Steven's able to fight off the zombies. But Mark couldn't. So at some point he manages to help him, and then one of them grabs Mark from over the edge, one that wasn't there before, and starts to pull him over. Steven rushes him, jumps the guy, and the guy spins with him, and they both go over the edge. Steven has now been abandoned in the afterlife. And you see him kind of reach out toward them, and he turns to stone. It's very sad. That's the moment Tauret notices the scales have balanced. And like that, Mark turns, boom, he's in the field of reeds. Well, there you go. Now you know. And if knowing is half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. How's that for a cliffhanger? I like what the episode does. It does a lot. It does a lot of things, especially for mental health. So, yeah, man, it's a good episode. I liked it. Let's see. Know-it-all index for this episode, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I really liked it. 9 out of 10. They're doing some good work. I like the representational stuff in terms of like how mental health works and these things and whatnot. And they really handled the doors. And this whole episode could have been a mess. I thought they did a good job steering us through it. And I was never lost in the shuffle, and that's a difficult trick to play when you're dealing with things like dissociative identity disorder or any of those other things. Anyway, so yeah, yeah, I can't wait to talk more about it. Comment below. Kind of let me know what you think, man. I really would appreciate talking to you guys. Like the video, subscribe, click the little bell icon to be notified when new content drops. Yeah, man, I'll see you next week. I can't wait to see how this whole thing wraps up. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.